Do make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. My mother's voice cut through the silence like a blade. You can't afford your father's birthday dinner, she said, her tone laced with that familiar cocktail of superiority and dismissal. Her words stung, not because they were new, but because they echoed every lie she'd ever fed me, that I was nothing, that I had no place at the table, that I would always be the forgotten child in the shadows of their perfect world. What she didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that the very restaurant where they planned to celebrate Dad's birthday was mine. And the moment I stepped through those gold-trimmed glass doors, the staff didn't just greet me. They bowed their heads. They called me owner. That was the night everything changed. That was the night secrets cracked wide open, and the truth came crashing into our carefully staged family dinner like shattered glass. I never planned to expose myself that evening. Honestly, I wanted to watch quietly from the sidelines, maybe even let my father enjoy his birthday without the bitter taste of my mother's venom. But something inside me snapped the moment she smirked and said, "Sweetheart, you should sit this one out. This dinner is far above your pay grade." Pay grade. That's what she called it. As if my worth could be calculated like a salary slip. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled faintly, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence is more terrifying than words when you're sitting on a secret that could burn down the whole house. When the night of the dinner came, I walked into Le Palais d'Or, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the very place my parents insisted I couldn't afford to step foot in. Their laughter floated from a corner table, surrounded by family friends and colleagues, unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shift. Then it happened. The maître d', spotting me from across the room, straightened instantly. His voice rang out clear, cutting through the chatter. "Good evening, Ms. Morgan. Welcome back. The owner's table has been prepared for you." The room fell silent. Forks clattered. Glasses froze midair. My mother's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing in confusion. And my father, dear God, the look on his face. That was just the beginning. Every step I took across the marble floor felt like a drumbeat echoing through the room. My heels clicked against the stone, sharp and deliberate, as if announcing my arrival in a language my family couldn't ignore. The maître d' guided me with reverence, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. "This way, Ms. Morgan. Your table is always ready. Always ready." The words seemed to ricochet around the room, bouncing off the stunned faces of my mother, my father, and every guest at their table. I caught my mother's expression first, her painted lips parted slightly, frozen in disbelief. Her fingers clenched her wine glass so tightly I half expected it to shatter in her hand. Then my eyes moved to my father. He wasn't angry. He wasn't mocking me. No, his brow furrowed with something else. Confusion. Suspicion. The kind of look a man gives when the puzzle he thought he solved suddenly rearranges itself. "Owner," my mother finally hissed, her voice slicing through the silence. "What is the meaning of this?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the moment wasn't just about me, it was about them seeing me differently before I even uttered a word. The maître d' stopped at the head table, draped in white silk, set apart from the others, with the city skyline glittering through the glass behind it. A bottle of the restaurant's finest champagne chilled in a silver bucket beside it. "Will you be dining alone, Ms. Morgan?" he asked smoothly. "Or shall I extend your table to include your party?" The word party carried weight, because in that instant, the entire dining hall realized what was happening. The daughter they dismissed, the one they said couldn't afford a seat, owned the very ground beneath their feet. My mother's chair scraped loudly as she pushed back from the table, her cheeks flaming red. "This is ridiculous," she spat, rising to her feet. "You're not." "Sit down," my father cut her off, his voice low, steady, and commanding in a way I hadn't heard in years. His eyes never left me. He wanted answers. And I was ready to give them. Because this dinner wasn't just a celebration of his birthday. It was the night I revealed the secret I'd been building in silence, a truth that would expose every lie they'd told about me. And I hadn't even started speaking yet. I let the maître d' pull out my chair at the head table, sitting with a calmness that was more weapon than comfort. My mother still looked like she might faint or pounce. My father leaned forward, both hands folded on the table, his eyes boring into me like he could pry the truth out of my silence. I poured myself a glass of champagne. The pop of the cork seemed to snap the tension in the room, but only for a moment. "You want to explain what this little charade is?" my mother demanded, her voice sharp enough to draw every eye in the restaurant back to us. "Since when does a girl like you suddenly own this?" Her words dripped with the same poison I'd tasted my whole life. "A girl like you. The unwanted child. The disappointment. The one they tried to write off as a failure." I swirled the champagne lazily in my glass before meeting her gaze. "It's not sudden," I said softly, but every syllable landed heavy. "I've been building this for years. While you mocked me. While you dismissed me. While you told Dad I was too weak, too poor, too small to matter." Her face went pale. She hadn't expected me to strike back with her own words. But my father, he leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing with something sharper than disbelief. It was realization. "You've been hiding something," he said. His tone wasn't accusing. It was calculating. I nodded. "Not hiding. Protecting. Because I knew the moment you found out, you'd try to take it from me, or worse, destroy it." The table went still. Even the clinking of cutlery from other guests had stopped. The entire restaurant was listening. "I own Le Palais d'Or." I let the words hang in the air. "Not just this location. All 5 of them across the city. Every plate, every chandelier, every bottle of wine that passes through this place runs through me." Gasps rippled across the dining hall. My mother blinked rapidly, her hand trembling against the stem of her glass. My father, however, didn't flinch. He studied me the way a chess master studies a player he suddenly realizes is no pawn but a queen. Finally, he spoke. "So that's where you've been disappearing to? That's why you never asked me for money?" I smiled faintly. "That's why I didn't need it." My mother slammed her palm against the table, shattering the fragile moment. "You mean to tell me you sat there and let us believe you were struggling while you were playing some secret empire game behind our backs?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping so low the entire room had to lean into the silence to hear me. "No, Mother. I wasn't playing. I was surviving. I was proving to myself, not to you, that I didn't need your approval to become more than you ever imagined." My father's lips twitched, almost like he was fighting a smile. But behind his eyes was something darker, something I couldn't yet name. And that's when I realized the dinner wasn't over. The real game hadn't even started. For a long moment, my father said nothing. His silence was heavier than my mother's outrage, heavier than the stunned murmurs floating across the restaurant. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Not a laugh of joy, not pride, no, it was darker. A sound that chilled my skin. "So," he said finally, his voice smooth, "my daughter owns 5 restaurants and never thought to mention it to her own father. Impressive." His eyes flickered, sharp as glass. "But also, foolish." I stiffened. "Foolish?" He swirled his drink, the amber liquid catching the chandelier light. Do you really think something of this scale could exist in this city without me knowing? Without me watching? My heart skipped. His tone wasn't rhetorical, it was truth. You knew? My words barely made it past my lips. His gaze locked onto mine, a predator's calm calculation. Of course I knew. I knew the day you signed your first lease. I knew the investors who turned you down. I knew the banker who eventually approved you. He tilted his glass, smirking. Why do you think the city never shut you down, even when permits went missing? Why do you think your rivals mysteriously backed out of expansion deals? My throat went dry. Memories began rushing back, contracts that suddenly fell into place, competitors who mysteriously withdrew, problems that smoothed themselves over just when I thought I was drowning. You helped me. No, he said, setting his glass down with a deliberate clink. I tested you. I wanted to see if you had the blood for it. If you could carry the Morgan name. His voice dropped, cold and deliberate. And you did. The table fell silent. My mother stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. You knew, she hissed. You let her deceive us. You let her embarrass us like this. But my father ignored her. His eyes stayed on me, unblinking. You built this empire, yes. But make no mistake, it exists because I allowed it. And now, daughter, the real question is. He leaned forward, his voice a razor whisper meant only for me. Will you keep it, or will you lose it all by challenging me? A chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about my independence or my mother's cruelty. This was about a bigger game, a war I hadn't even known I was already part of. And my father. He had been pulling strings from the shadows the entire time. The restaurant air felt charged, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. My father's words still burned in my ears, keep it, or lose it all by challenging me. I straightened in my chair, refusing to let him see my pulse racing beneath my skin. You're saying everything I built only survived because you let it. He didn't hesitate. That's exactly what I'm saying. My mother seized her chance, slamming her napkin onto the table. Do you hear yourself, Robert? She's been scheming behind our backs. And you what? You encouraged it. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and venomous. She's nothing but a liar. A selfish, ungrateful child who... Be quiet. My father's command snapped like a whip, silencing her mid-word. He didn't even look at her. His gaze was locked on me, as if no one else existed. You've proven yourself, he said slowly. You have the brains, the patience, the ruthlessness. But now you face the real test. Ownership in this city isn't about contracts or staff who bow at your feet. It's about power and the alliances that keep it. I swallowed hard. And what if I don't want your alliances? What if I don't want to play your game? His lips curved in a humorless smile. Then you'll lose. Everything. The table went dead silent. My mother's eyes lit with a vicious kind of glee. She leaned in, seizing the moment to twist the knife. You see, darling, you've been nothing more than a child playing pretend. Daddy was pulling the strings all along, and now that you've embarrassed yourself, you'll hand it all over to him like you should have from the beginning. Her words dripped with poison, but for the first time, I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice steady. I'm not handing anything over. Not to him. Not to you. I built this. I own this. And if my father thinks he can scare me into surrendering it, he's about to learn I'm not the weak daughter you raised me to be. The room seemed to exhale at once, every guest hanging on the clash unfolding before them. My father's smirk deepened, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, betrayed a flicker of something else. Not anger. Not disappointment. Respect. He leaned forward, his voice low, almost approving. Then prove it, daughter. Prove to me you're strong enough to keep what's yours. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't just a family dinner anymore. It was war. The restaurant felt like it had shrunk to just us, the glittering chandeliers, the skyline beyond the windows, even the murmuring guests had faded into shadows. Only the three of us remained, locked in a battle that no one else could fight. My father tapped his glass once, a slow, deliberate rhythm that carried the weight of authority. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but lethal. You want to keep this empire? Fine. But you'll need to prove you can survive in my world. I lifted my chin. And what world is that? His smile was thin, cold. The one where loyalty is a currency, and betrayal is a knife you'll never see coming. The one where power isn't inherited, it's seized. He paused, letting the silence draw taut before he delivered his strike. There's a property I've been circling for months. A prime location on the riverfront. Every major investor wants it, but the deal's tied up in courts, politics, and people who'd sell their own blood for leverage. Secure that property, make it yours, and you'll prove you're not just some pretender playing owner. Fail. His eyes flickered with something dangerous. And you'll watch every restaurant you own crumble. Permit by permit. Supplier by supplier. Until you're left with nothing but your pride. A shiver ran through me, but I didn't let it show. My mother smirked, her voice dripping with triumph. Did you hear that? He's giving you a chance to bow out gracefully before you embarrass yourself further. Take it, dear. You'll save yourself the humiliation. I turned to her slowly, my voice sharp enough to cut her smirk in half. Humiliation is living under your roof, being told every day that I wasn't enough. Owning this empire in silence was the first time I breathed without your permission. I'd rather burn trying than bow to either of you. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. My father's smirk twisted into something almost proud. He leaned back, studying me like a general watching a soldier step into the battlefield for the first time. Then the game begins, he said simply. And just like that, my father turned his birthday dinner into a declaration of war. The dinner ended without dessert. My father raised his glass, toasted himself with a thin smile, and dismissed the party as though nothing monumental had happened. But I knew better. Every guest left whispering, eyes darting between me and him, unsure which Morgan would stand victorious. By the time I stepped outside, the night air felt like it had teeth. Cold, sharp, and waiting to bite. My phone buzzed before I even reached my car. A message from my lawyer. Urgent. Your liquor license for Midtown location has been suspended effective immediately. My chest tightened. I blinked hard, reading it again. Suspended. That location alone brought in nearly a quarter of my monthly revenue. Losing it, even temporarily, would shake investor confidence. Another buzz. A second message, this one from my head chef downtown. Suppliers are pulling out. Deliveries cancelled. No warning. No reason. My hands trembled slightly around the phone, but I steadied them. This wasn't coincidence. This was my father. He hadn't even given me 24 hours before striking his first blow. I could almost hear his voice in my head. Prove it. Survive my world. I stood there on the curb, the glow of the restaurant's golden lights behind me, my mother's laughter echoing faintly through the glass. To them, This was already over. My father had set the traps, and now I was expected to stumble right into them, humiliated and broken. But they had underestimated one thing. I hadn't built this empire in silence because I was weak. I built it because I learned to move in shadows, to outthink, outwait, and outfight every door that slammed in my face. I lifted my phone, dialing the one person my father didn't know I had on my side. A partner I'd kept hidden, even from my staff. When they answered, their voice was low and clipped. I wondered how long it would take him to strike. "He's already trying to bury me," I whispered, my eyes scanning the city lights like they might hold answers. Licenses pulled. Suppliers cut. "He wants me to crawl back." The voice on the line chuckled darkly. "Then it's time we show him your empire isn't as fragile as he thinks." I hung up, a fire sparking in my chest. The war had officially started. And I wasn't going to play defense. I was going to strike back. By morning, the news had already spread. Morgan heiress exposed in family power clash. The headlines painted me as a spoiled daughter trying to outmaneuver her father, the business titan. Exactly the image he wanted. But he underestimated how many people were tired of his empire. I sat in my office at the top floor of the flagship location, staring at the skyline. My hidden ally walked in without knocking, as they always did. Adrian Cole, my silent investor, my strategist in the shadows. Once one of my father's closest advisors, until he'd burned that bridge with arrogance. "You were right," Adrian said, tossing a folder onto my desk. "Your father's already moving pieces against you. He's leaning on your suppliers, threatening their contracts with his hotels. But he made one mistake." I raised a brow. "Which is?" Adrian smirked. "He forgot loyalty is fragile. Money talks louder than fear. And I've just secured you a new supplier, one of his own." I flipped open the folder. Inside were contracts signed not by a stranger, but by Victor Langston, my father's longest-standing partner. I looked up sharply. Victor? He'd never cross my father. Adrian's smirk deepened. "Never. Or just never before. Turns out, your father cut him out of a riverfront deal last month. Victor's been waiting for a reason to bleed him back." My pulse quickened. The riverfront property, the very one my father dared me to win. "This means," I breathed. "This means," Adrian interrupted, leaning closer, "not only do you have your supply chain restored, you now have the man who knows exactly how to sabotage your father's bid for that property." For a moment, the weight of it sank in. My father had thrown the first strike, but now I had something sharper, his own ally, turned against him. I closed the folder, the sound snapping like a blade sliding back into its sheath. "Then we hit him where it hurts. The riverfront." Adrian's eyes gleamed. "Exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I stood, staring out the glass at the city my father thought he owned. My reflection was different now, not the quiet, forgotten daughter, but a woman sharpening herself into a weapon. If my father wanted war, he was about to discover his daughter could fight fire with fire. And she wasn't afraid to burn. The riverfront property was everything my father said it would be: prime land, the crown jewel of the city's future development. Owning it meant more than just wealth. It meant dominance. Adrian and I moved fast. With Victor Langston's backing, the permits that were tangled in bureaucracy suddenly slid across desks with surprising ease. Politicians who once sided with my father began taking my calls. Investors, hungry for fresh leadership, shifted their attention toward me. For a moment, it felt like I was ahead of him. Like for once, he hadn't anticipated me. But then the cracks appeared. It started with a call from my banker. Ms. Morgan, we've run into an issue with your financing. The funds you secured are frozen under investigation. Anonymous allegations of fraud. Before I could process that, another call came, this time from my legal team. A lawsuit's been filed against you personally. Claims of intellectual property theft tied to your restaurants. The plaintiff. A shell company. No face. No name. My stomach twisted. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography. By the time I got to the courthouse to sign the final documents for the riverfront property, the trap had already sprung. Adrian and I walked into the marble lobby, our steps echoing. The clerk behind the desk looked up, her eyes flicking nervously toward a man standing at the far end of the hall. My father. He was waiting, his hands clasped behind his back, perfectly composed, like a general watching his enemy march straight into the battlefield he'd designed. Daughter, he greeted smoothly, as though this was a family brunch instead of a war zone. I see you've taken quite an interest in my property. My fists clenched at my sides. Your property. The deal is nearly mine. His smile widened. Nearly. Except, of course, for the environmental injunction I filed this morning. Adrian froze. You what? My father's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Turns out, the land is a protected wetlands area. No construction can move forward until the courts resolve the matter. Could take months. Could take years. In the meantime, he leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. Your investors will lose patience. Your contracts will bleed. And you'll learn what happens when you try to outplay me. My throat went dry. He hadn't just blocked me, he'd poisoned the board, forcing me into a losing game. But then something flickered inside me. A memory. A detail I had stumbled on while combing through the property's history weeks earlier, something I hadn't told Adrian, or anyone. I steadied my breath, meeting my father's smug gaze. Unless, I said slowly, you overlooked something too. His smile faltered just slightly. And in that tiny crack, I knew. I wasn't finished. Not yet. The courthouse air was heavy, every word echoing against marble walls. My father's smug silence pressed down like a weight, certain he had me cornered. But he didn't know what I knew. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. Protected wetlands, you said? I let the words hang, my voice calm, almost amused. Funny you should mention that. Because I dug deeper into that designation. My father's smirk barely wavered, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, curiosity, laced with the faintest edge of doubt. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it onto the clerk's desk. The property was flagged as wetlands years ago. But 2 months ago, after the last city survey, that designation was lifted. Officially. Quietly. And I filed the purchase agreement that same week. Adrian's eyes widened. You never told me you already secured it. I allowed myself the faintest smile. Some secrets are worth keeping even from allies. The clerk opened the file, scanning quickly. Her brows arched. She's right. The injunction doesn't apply. Ms. Morgan's purchase is legally valid. For the first time all evening, my father's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his hand curling behind his back. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You set a trap. But you set it too late. While you were busy pulling strings, I already moved 3 steps ahead. You don't own this property, Father. I do. Gasps rippled through the lobby as the clerk stamped the final papers. The sound echoed like a gavel, like a verdict. Adrian exhaled sharply beside me, his grin breaking through. Game. Set. Match. But I didn't smile. Because as my father's eyes locked onto mine, there was no anger. No fury. Only something colder. Calculating. He leaned close, his whisper a razor sliding into my ear. Enjoy your little victory, daughter. But you've just declared open war. And in war, his breath chilled my skin. Families don't survive. He walked away before I could answer, his footsteps slow, deliberate, echoing into the distance. I stood frozen, papers in hand, heart hammering. I had beaten him this round, yes. But his words lingered like a curse. This was no longer just a game of business. It was personal. And I wasn't sure anyone would walk away whole. The victory should have tasted sweet. The papers were mine, the riverfront belonged to me, and for the first time in years, I had stood toe-to-toe with my father and walked away with more than just scars. But his words lingered. Families don't survive. I didn't have to wait long to understand what he meant. 2 days later, I walked into my midtown location to find chaos. My head chef, Marco, was gone. Vanished without notice, leaving behind nothing but a resignation letter that looked wrong. Too clean. Too rehearsed. An hour later, Adrian stormed into my office, slamming his phone onto my desk. He's moving fast. 3 of your managers have been approached. Guess who offered them double salaries and guaranteed security if they left you? I didn't need to guess. My father wasn't just stripping away my empire piece by piece, he was going after my people, the ones I trusted most. But then came the strike I never saw coming. My phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. Careful who you trust. Adrian isn't who you think he is. I froze, staring at the words. My stomach tightened, ice creeping through my veins. I looked up at Adrian, who was pacing the room, his jaw tight, his eyes flashing with anger at my father's games. But suddenly, I wasn't sure if his anger was real or staged. Could my father have planted him in my life years ago? Was Adrian my lifeline or the knife at my back? I tucked the phone away before Adrian could see the message, my heart pounding louder than his footsteps. My father wasn't just attacking me from the outside anymore. He was sowing suspicion, poisoning the inside, turning my own shadow against me. And I realized then, this wasn't just about business or even survival. It was about trust. About betrayal. About who would stand beside me when the fire came. And who would light the match. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my penthouse, city lights flickering against the ceiling like restless ghosts. The message echoed in my mind. Careful who you trust. Adrian isn't who you think he is. It was poison, planted perfectly. My father's voice without his name. But the question gnawed at me, what if it wasn't a lie? By morning, my decision was made. If Adrian was loyal, he would pass my test. If not, I would find out before he put the knife between my ribs. I set the trap carefully. A fabricated deal. A fake contract drafted overnight for a high-end supplier in Paris, exclusive wines my father had been trying to secure for years. I made sure only Adrian saw it, sliding it across my desk with the right mixture of urgency and exhaustion. Can you handle this quietly? I asked, feigning vulnerability. No one else knows about it yet. Adrian's eyes lit briefly, but he nodded quickly. Too quickly. Of course. Leave it to me. I watched him leave with the papers, my pulse hammering. Every fiber of me screamed that I'd just handed him bait. And I was right. By the next afternoon, my father's name appeared in an encrypted email intercepted by my IT team. Not addressed to me. Not even to Adrian. But the timing was too perfect, the details too precise. My fake Paris deal was already in my father's hands. My chest tightened, the air heavy in my lungs. It was true. Adrian had leaked it. Or had he? I stared at the screen, unsettled. The email bore my father's signature style, but it was too clean, too obvious, like he wanted me to know Adrian had betrayed me. Paranoia clawed at me. Was Adrian a traitor, or was this just another layer of my father's game, meant to rip the only ally I had out from under me? That night, I confronted Adrian. We sat across from each other in my office, the skyline blazing behind us. His eyes were steady, his face unreadable. "Why does my father know about Paris?" I demanded. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did beneath the desk. Adrian leaned back slowly, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a dare. "Maybe," he said softly, "you should be asking yourself if he knew, before I even touched those papers." The words sliced through me. Had I trapped him, or had I trapped myself? For the first time since this war began, I wasn't sure who the real enemy was. And that was exactly what my father wanted. The city moved around me like nothing had changed, but inside, I was a storm. I couldn't shake Adrian's words. "Maybe you should be asking yourself if he knew before I even touched those papers." It was infuriating and terrifying because he might be right. I needed clarity. Proof. Something that couldn't be twisted by my father's manipulations or my own paranoia. So I went digging. By midnight, I was in my office archives, scrolling through months of financial records and access logs. My father had resources, yes, but someone was feeding him insider details, things only a person within my circle could know. And then, I found it. An access log flagged at 2:14 a.m. the night before my Paris contract was leaked. A file opened from my private server, one only 3 people had clearance for: me, Adrian, and my mother. I froze, staring at the screen. No. Impossible. But the trail was there, my mother's login credentials, her encrypted email account routed through a server I didn't recognize, messages sent directly to a domain linked to my father's shell companies. I wanted to deny it, to scream that it was fake, that my father had planted it. But the timestamps matched her phone activity. The evidence was airtight. My own mother had betrayed me. And suddenly, her words from weeks ago came rushing back, her sneer at Dad's birthday dinner, her cold voice saying, "You couldn't afford this." It wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. She had been feeding him pieces of me all along, stripping me down until I was nothing but a pawn between them. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch. We stood in the garden of my childhood home, the smell of roses thick in the air. "You knew," I whispered, my voice breaking. "All this time, you were his eyes. His weapon." Her lips curved in that familiar, condescending smile. "And you were foolish enough to think you built all of this on your own. Sweetheart, your father and I gave you everything. Did you really think we'd let you keep it?" Her words sliced deeper than any knife. Adrian hadn't been the traitor. My father hadn't just stolen my empire. He'd stolen the one person I thought I could still trust. And now, I realized, the war wasn't just with him. It was with her. The betrayal didn't break me. It ignited me. Standing in that garden, with my mother's smug smile etched in my memory, I realized the truth. Neither of them ever saw me as their daughter. I was a pawn, a placeholder, an asset to be shifted across their chessboard. But pawns have one advantage. If they survive long enough, they become queens. And I was done surviving. The first step was silence. I didn't rage, didn't scream, didn't let them know that I had uncovered the rot beneath my own bloodline. Instead, I played along. Dinners with my mother where I smiled and nodded. Calls with my father where I feigned exhaustion and doubt. I let them believe their poison was working. Meanwhile, I built my strike. I pulled Adrian in close, closer than ever. I laid out the truth, showed him the logs, the proof of my mother's betrayal. His face hardened, his loyalty burning brighter with every word. "Then we take them both down," he said. And we began. First, we turned to the staff my father had stolen. Marco, the chef, was the key. I invited him to a reunion dinner, a carefully orchestrated evening where I revealed the forged resignation letter he'd supposedly written. The shock on his face was real. He had never written it. My father had blackmailed his family. Piece by piece, I gathered the loyal ones back, those who had left under strange circumstances, those whose trust had been poisoned. With each reclaimed ally, I tightened the noose. Next, I moved money. Quietly, invisibly. Accounts my father thought he controlled were siphoned into offshore trusts under names he didn't know I owned. Every shell company my mother touched became a map for me to reverse engineer her trail of betrayal. And then, I planted my own bait. An acquisition deal, bigger than the Paris contract, bigger than anything I had done yet, an international expansion into Dubai. I made sure the details were mouth-watering, impossible to resist. I leaked just enough to my mother, let her believe she was stealing another secret for my father. But this time, the deal was poisoned. Every clause was a trap, every document a snare, all designed to collapse around whoever signed it without my countersignature. I wasn't just fighting back. I was setting the stage for their empire to burn from the inside out. And the beauty of it? They wouldn't see me coming. Because they still thought of me as their daughter. But daughters grow up. Daughters learn. And daughters, when betrayed, become executioners. The night of the Dubai deal was electric. The kind of night where the city hums louder, where every passing car feels like a sign. I sat in my office, glass of wine untouched, my phone glowing on the desk. The contract had already been sent out, my carefully poisoned masterpiece, polished with the kind of brilliance that made it look irresistible. My father thought he'd stolen it. My mother thought she'd delivered me another fatal blow. Neither realized I had written their downfall between the lines. By midnight, the confirmation came through. Their signatures were on the papers. My trap was live. The moment they inked their names, their entire network, the shell corporations, the hidden accounts, the offshore havens they'd bled into for decades, shifted into my control. My clauses were ironclad, tied to loopholes they hadn't noticed, crafted so well even their army of lawyers wouldn't see a way out. It was surgical. Clean. Brutal. Adrian stood across from me, phone in hand, reading the real-time updates as funds, assets, and properties began transferring. "It's working," he whispered. His voice was a mix of awe and disbelief. "You just gutted them." I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I felt still. Cold. As if I were watching a storm I had unleashed with my own bare hands. Then, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice thundered through the line, but beneath the rage, there was something I had never heard before, fear. "What have you done?" he roared. "Do you know what this means? You've destroyed everything." "No," I said, my voice low, steady. "I destroyed yours." A silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. Then he laughed. A dark, broken sound. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've set loose." And the line went dead. My hand tightened around the phone, pulse racing. Because even though I had gutted their empire, his words rang true. I hadn't ended the war. I had escalated it. And in the shadows of my victory, I could feel it, something bigger was coming. My father wasn't done. And neither was my mother. I woke the next morning to chaos. My phone buzzed non-stop, calls, texts, notifications. At first, I thought it was about the Dubai deal, the industry headlines celebrating my brilliant acquisition. But then I saw the news alerts. Daughter turns on parents in ruthless corporate heist. Heiress accused of fraudulent takeover. Anonymous sources claim she manipulated her own mother. Every article, every whisper, painted me as a monster. My reputation wasn't just being questioned, it was being shredded. And then came the smear campaign. Photos of me stepping out of nightclubs I'd never set foot in. Fake emails leaked to the press, making me look reckless, arrogant, criminal. My face splashed across headlines as if I were the villain in my own story. It was my father's hand. I could hear his venom in every accusation. But it was my mother's touch that made it deadly. She knew me, knew how to twist the knife where it hurt most, my credibility, my worth, my name. By noon, investors were calling, jittery, pulling out of projects. Staff members whispered in corners, uncertain who to trust. Adrian slammed a folder onto my desk. Inside were copies of falsified contracts, ones with my forged signature. "They're framing you for fraud," he said, his jaw tight. "If this sticks, it's not just your business on the line. It's prison." The walls felt like they were closing in. For the first time, I realized my parents weren't just trying to beat me. They were trying to erase me. But fear didn't consume me. Not this time. If they wanted war beyond money, I would give them one. Because the one thing they underestimated, the one thing they never understood, was that I wasn't afraid to burn everything down if it meant they burned with me. And as I looked out at the city, storm clouds rolling in, I whispered to myself, if they want me gone, they'll have to bury me alive. And I had no intention of staying buried. If they wanted to drag me through the mud, fine. But they forgot one thing. I knew where all their skeletons were buried because I had been forced to grow up in the graveyard. The smear campaign spread like wildfire, but I didn't flinch. I watched. I waited. And then, I struck. Adrian and I spent 3 sleepless nights combing through encrypted archives, files my parents thought they had hidden in offshore servers. But I had the keys. I had always had them. My father just never imagined I'd turn them against him. What we found was enough to scorch the earth. Millions siphoned from charities under my mother's name. Payments to judges, regulators, politicians. My father's quiet partnerships with crime families that greased his rise to power. Photos. Wire transfers. Emails dripping with arrogance, carelessness, proof. It wasn't just corruption. It was rot, bone deep. And I didn't bury it. I detonated it. A single press release at dawn. Thousands of files attached, uploaded to servers no one could erase. Distributed to journalists, regulators, activists. By noon, it wasn't just news. It was a global scandal. The headlines turned fast. Power couple implicated in massive fraud scheme. Philanthropic foundation exposed as money laundering front. Evidence links billionaire tycoon to organized crime. The same networks that smeared me now fed on the chaos like wolves, their cameras flashing in my parents' faces. I stood at the window of my office, watching the storm unfold, feeling, not joy, not even triumph, just a cold, quiet clarity. This wasn't victory. This was survival. But survival had its price. Because as I scrolled through the files we had released, I realized some of my own fingerprints were there too, documents I had signed years ago under their command, transactions I hadn't questioned. The line between their crimes and my complicity blurred. My mother called me that night. Her voice wasn't smug anymore, it was venomous, shaking with rage. "You think you've destroyed us? You've destroyed yourself. You're no different from us." And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. Because maybe she was right. The world wasn't celebrating me. They were dissecting me. Morning talk shows debated my name like I was a headline, not a human being. Was she a whistleblower or a co-conspirator? A daughter seeking justice, or a vulture carving her parents alive for their fortune? And the truth was, I couldn't answer them. Because every question they asked, I had already whispered to myself in the dark. Yes, I exposed my parents. But hadn't I benefited from their empire for years? Hadn't I eaten at their tables, signed my name to their contracts, lived under their roof of blood money? Maybe I hadn't built the rot, but I had lived inside it. That thought ate at me, even as my phone lit up with messages. Some praised me as fearless, a survivor who took down titans. Others called me poison, a traitor, a criminal dressed in designer clothes. But the one message that mattered came directly from my father. No threats this time. No rage. Just 10 words. "You've proven you're my daughter. Now prove you're my heir." I read it again and again, each time colder than before. Because underneath the challenge was something more sinister, an invitation. He wasn't done. He wasn't defeated. He was impressed. And that terrified me more than his wrath ever had. Adrian slammed the phone from my hand when he saw the message. "Don't even think about answering him," he snapped. "This is another trap. He'll drag you down with him." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. All my life, I wanted freedom from my parents' shadows. Yet here I was, sitting in the ashes of their empire, and part of me wondered, had I become the very thing I swore I'd never be? The city outside glittered like it always had, indifferent to my storm. And as I stared at my reflection in the glass, I barely recognized the woman looking back. Was she the hero who burned down corruption? Or was she the villain who simply claimed the throne? The answer was coming. And when it did, the world wouldn't just watch. They would choose. I thought my father would retreat into silence, licking his wounds in the shadows. I should have known better. 3 nights after the scandal erupted, he stepped onto the world stage, literally. A live press conference, streamed across every major network, reporters packed like vultures in the lobby of one of his towers. I watched from my office, heart hammering as he walked to the podium. He looked untouchable. No traces of defeat, no cracks in his armor. If anything, he radiated more power than ever. "My daughter," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "has proven herself." The room buzzed. My phone lit up. Adrian cursed under his breath. "She exposed corruption," my father continued, his eyes glittering. "She dismantled an empire that even I built. That is not betrayal. That is strength. And strength is the only currency that matters." He leaned forward, voice lowering, as if speaking directly to me through the cameras. "I built a dynasty. She sharpened the blade. Now the question is, will she wield it beside me or against me?" The crowd erupted in chaos, questions flying. But his gaze never wavered. He was challenging me, live, with the world watching. And it worked. Within hours, hashtags flooded social media. #daughter of the king. #new queen. Memes painted us as rulers of a crumbling empire, destined either to clash or to crown each other. Investors who had abandoned me now hesitated, wondering if siding with me meant inheriting the throne of the most ruthless man alive. And in the quiet after the storm, Adrian turned to me, his face pale. "This is it," he said. "He's pulling you into his world. If you answer him even once, you're his. And if you don't..." I finished the thought for him. "He'll destroy me." I stood at the window, the city glittering beneath me like a chessboard. My father had made his move, and now the next belonged to me. But which was more dangerous, standing at his side, or standing against him? The summons came at midnight. A single text on an encrypted line I hadn't seen in years. Penthouse. Alone. I knew what it meant. He wasn't offering me a choice. He was demanding my presence. Adrian tried to stop me. "It's a trap. He'll corner you, break you, twist everything." I met his eyes, steady. "Then let him try." By 1 a.m., I was stepping out of the elevator into the penthouse where I had grown up, a place that smelled of expensive cigars, leather, and ghosts. Nothing had changed. The same paintings, the same grand piano in the corner, the same view of a city that my father believed belonged to him. And there he was, sitting in his chair like a king on his throne, a glass of scotch in his hand, as if the scandals hadn't touched him. "Daughter," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You've made me proud. I didn't sit. You've made me furious." He chuckled, swirling his glass. "Fury is a sign of power. You've finally stopped being weak. You've finally stopped being her." He spat the last word, and I knew he meant my mother. I clenched my fists. "You think I want your approval? I didn't burn your empire for applause. I did it because you thought I'd never be strong enough to beat you." He rose then, slowly, towering even in his age. His eyes bored into mine, cold and burning all at once. "You haven't beaten me," he said. "You've become me. And now, the world is watching. They already see you as my heir. All that remains is whether you accept it or I erase you." He stepped closer, so close I could smell the smoke on his breath. "So," he whispered, "will you wear the crown I built, or die trying to shatter it?" The silence between us was suffocating, the kind that only ends with blood or surrender. And in that moment, I understood, this wasn't just about power anymore. It was about destiny. And destiny demanded a choice. The silence stretched like a blade between us. His eyes were on me, sharp, waiting, daring me to choose. To kneel or to burn. To crown myself or to be crushed. I drew in a slow breath, my pulse steady, and finally said the words he least expected. "I'll stand beside you." For the first time in my life, my father looked startled. Only for a second, but I saw it, the flicker of disbelief, the fracture in his armor. Then it was gone, replaced by a wolfish smile. "I knew you'd see reason," he said, raising his glass in triumph. "Together, there's nothing we can't." I cut him off. "No. You don't understand." I stepped closer, my voice cold enough to freeze the air. "I'll stand beside you, but not as your heir. Not as your daughter. As your executioner." Confusion flickered, then fury. But before he could speak, I slid a folder onto the desk between us. His eyes dropped to it, scanning, and for once, I had the upper hand. Inside were the final papers, documents that tied him directly to crimes even my mother had kept buried. Records I hadn't released yet, the last dagger I had held in reserve. And beneath them, a single legal notice. A power of attorney transfer. Signed. Sealed. Filed. Effective immediately. "Your empire is already gone," I whispered. But your freedom? That's mine to decide now. His hand tightened on the glass until it cracked, amber liquid dripping down his wrist. His voice was low, venomous. You think this ends me? No, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I think this ends us. Because in choosing to destroy him, I was destroying the last piece of myself that still belonged to him. The man who had made me. The man who had broken me. The man I had just condemned. And in that moment, I realized winning wasn't victory. It was sacrifice. And I had just sacrificed my father. I thought it would end with the stroke of a pen. That once the papers were filed, once the proof was out, the war would finally be over. I was wrong. The morning after I stripped him of everything, the city awoke to chaos. Protesters flooded the streets outside my restaurants. Reporters camped at my door, screaming accusations of fraud, betrayal, patricide. The headlines weren't just about him anymore. Now I was the monster who destroyed her own father. And he was feeding it. Somehow, even in ruin, he still commanded loyalty. Old allies turned into anonymous sources. Stories of my childhood ambition, twisted into tales of greed. Whispers of forged contracts, staged scandals, and fabricated evidence. The world wasn't sure who the villain was anymore, him or me. By evening, Adrian burst into my office, pale, clutching his phone. You need to see this. He showed me a live broadcast. My father, standing outside a courthouse, flanked by cameras, his once polished suit slightly disheveled, but his voice sharp, powerful, deliberate. My daughter, he declared, has stolen everything from me. She forged my name, manipulated my wife, and orchestrated the very crimes she accuses me of. She is not my heir. She is my enemy. And I will not stop until the world sees her for what she truly is. The crowd roared. Some cheered him. Some booed. But it didn't matter, the seed was planted. He wasn't fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for my destruction. And the cruelest part? He didn't need money or power to do it. He just needed doubt. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Adrian placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. You've beaten him on the battlefield, he said. Now he's coming for your soul. And I realized then, this war had never really been about business. It was about identity. Who I was. Who he was. And whether I could ever cut him out of me without bleeding to death. I should have known he wouldn't stop at headlines. My father never fought wars with words alone. The first blow came quietly. Marco, my chef, the one I had pulled back from his grip, was found beaten in an alley, his hands broken, his knives stolen. The message was clear: anyone loyal to her will pay. 2 days later, one of my managers was followed home, her car run off the road. She survived, but her child was in the hospital. The look she gave me when I visited, fear mixed with regret, was worse than any blade. Adrian begged me to shut it all down. Close the restaurants, freeze operations, let the world think you're retreating. Don't give him more targets. But retreating meant surrender. And surrendering to my father was death. Then came the move that shattered me. I returned to my apartment one night to find the door ajar. My chest tightened. Adrian shoved past me, weapon drawn, clearing the rooms. Everything looked normal until I reached my bedroom. On the bed lay a single item. My childhood teddy bear. The one my father had given me on my 7th birthday. Its button eye was missing, its fur ragged with age. I hadn't seen it in years. Tucked under its paw was a note, written in his hand. Family is fragile. Protect yours while you still can. My knees almost buckled. Because beneath the words wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. He wasn't just after me anymore. He was circling Adrian. My staff. The few people who still stood beside me. And for the first time since this war began, I wasn't sure if I could shield them all. I had taken his empire. I had taken his freedom. But he was about to take something far more precious. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to stop him. The night the call came, I knew before I picked up that it was him. Adrian had gone to oversee renovations at one of the restaurants on the outskirts of the city. He was supposed to be gone only a few hours. When he didn't answer my texts, a coil of dread twisted tighter with every passing minute. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Hello, darling," my father's voice purred, smooth as glass, sharp as broken edges. "You've been busy." My blood iced over. "Where is he?" A chuckle. Slow. Measured. Cruel. Still breathing. For now. But I wonder, he paused, as though savoring my silence, how long a man like Adrian can withstand pressure when he knows he's the only thing standing between you and ruin. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "If you touch him, you'll what? Call the police. Run crying to the same authorities you bribed to drag me through the mud." His voice dropped, lower, darker. "No, my little traitor. This is between us. Always has been." And then, faintly in the background, I heard it, Adrian's muffled voice, hoarse, strained. Don't give him anything," before a thud silenced him. My breath caught. My heart thundered in my chest. "You took my empire," my father said, calm and cold. "Now I'll take yours. Piece by piece. And it starts with the man you trust most." The line went dead. For a moment, the world blurred around me. My father had crossed a line I didn't think even he would. This wasn't business. This wasn't revenge. This was war on my soul. I staggered back against the wall, gasping for breath, when I realized something terrifying. If I chose wrong, if I rushed in blindly to save Adrian, I might lose everything I'd built. But if I didn't, I might lose Adrian. Forever. And for the first time since I tore my father's empire apart, I felt like a child again, cornered, trembling, staring into the eyes of a monster who had raised me. The question was no longer if I would fight him. It was how far I was willing to go to win. The warehouse smelled of rust and gasoline. Shadows stretched long across the cracked concrete floor, broken only by a single hanging bulb that swayed with the wind leaking through shattered windows. That's where I found him. Adrian. Bound to a chair. Blood dripping from his lip, his eyes half-lidded but burning when they met mine. And stepping out of the shadows, my father. He looked almost ordinary. His suit wrinkled, his hair streaked with silver, his shoes scuffed. But the moment he smiled, I saw the man who had haunted every corner of my life. "My clever little girl," he said softly, spreading his arms. "Always running toward the fire. Tell me, will you run fast enough this time?" I raised the gun in my hand, my grip steady though my insides trembled. "Let him go." He chuckled, circling Adrian like a predator. "So quick to play hero. But you've forgotten something. Heroes bleed. And villains endure." With a snap of his fingers, two men dragged forward a steel briefcase and slammed it onto the table. He flicked it open, revealing documents, property deeds, contracts, the legal backbone of the empire I had taken from him. "Here's your choice," he said, his eyes glinting. "Sign these, return everything to me, and Adrian walks out alive. Refuse, and you'll leave this place alone." My pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed it was a trap. Even if I signed, he'd find another way to break me. But Adrian was barely holding on, his chest rising in shallow breaths. "Don't," Adrian rasped, his voice ragged. "He'll kill me anyway. Don't give him back what you bled for." Tears burned at the edges of my vision. My finger hovered over the trigger. My father's smirk widened, like he already owned my next move. "Choose wisely, daughter," he whispered. "Your empire, or your heart." The silence stretched, suffocating, broken only by the hum of that single swinging bulb. And I realized whatever I chose tonight wouldn't just decide Adrian's fate. It would decide mine. My finger tightened on the trigger. My father leaned closer, his face carved into that same arrogant mask he'd worn my whole life, the mask of a man who always believed he was untouchable. "Tick, tock," he whispered. That was when I made my choice. I lowered the gun and kicked the table with every ounce of strength I had. The briefcase snapped shut, papers scattering, and in the split second of his surprise, I lunged. The shot rang out before I even realized I'd fired. Glass shattered above us. His men scrambled, shouting, pulling their weapons. Adrian struggled against the ropes, screaming my name. The warehouse erupted in chaos. I dove behind the table as bullets splintered wood. My father barked orders, his voice sharp and furious, "Keep her alive." Alive, not dead. Because he didn't want to kill me. He wanted to break me. That was his mistake. I moved like fire, darting from shadow to shadow, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear through my chest. I wasn't just fighting for Adrian. I wasn't just fighting for the Empire. I was fighting for the girl I used to be, the one who had once trembled in his shadow. "No more." I caught one of his men off guard, slammed him against the wall, ripped the weapon from his hand. Another came at me, 2 shots, he dropped. My ears rang, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. And then it was just him. My father. Standing in the center of the wreckage, dust and smoke curling around him, his eyes gleaming with something between fury and pride. "You are my daughter," he said, his voice almost reverent. "Every move you make, every cutthroat choice, every drop of blood spilled, you are me." I aimed at him, hands steady now. "No," I whispered. "I'm what you created. But I'll never be you." We fired at the same time. The crack echoed like thunder. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My body braced for pain that didn't come. Then I saw it, his eyes widening, his hand pressed against his chest, crimson blooming beneath his fingers. He staggered, tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. And then, he fell. The warehouse went silent. I dropped the gun, rushing to Adrian. My hands shook as I cut the ropes, his weight collapsing against me. He was alive. Barely. But alive. We stumbled into the night together, smoke and blood behind us, the shadow of my father finally crumbling into dust. Or so I thought. Because as the sirens wailed in the distance, a single thought tore through me like lightning. If I had inherited his empire, had I also inherited his darkness? The news spread faster than blood on concrete. By dawn, every headline carried his name and mine. Daughter kills father in warehouse shootout. Heiress or assassin? The Empire of Shadows. They called it murder. They called it justice. They called it revenge. But nobody called it what it was, survival. Adrian lay in a hospital bed, bandaged, pale, fighting to heal. I barely left his side. When I did, it was to sit in interrogation rooms under the cold glare of detectives who wanted answers I couldn't give. Self-defense, one of them sneered. Funny. Doesn't look like you ran from him, you hunted him. And maybe I had. Because deep down, I hadn't just wanted to stop my father. I'd wanted to end him. Crowds gathered outside my restaurants, half chanting my name like I was a savior, the other half spitting accusations that I was no better than him. Investors pulled out. Staff quit, terrified the shadow of his vengeance would linger even after death. And then came the letter. Delivered in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single page written in his unmistakable hand. I told you, little one, family is forever. You may bury me, but you cannot bury what I left behind. My stomach dropped. Was it real? A trick? Something he'd arranged in case he died? Or was it someone else, one of his loyalists, carrying on his war from the grave? For the first time since the warehouse, I felt his presence again. Not as a man of flesh and blood, but as a shadow that clung to me, whispering that this was far from over. I stood at Adrian's bedside, clutching that letter, trembling. I thought I had ended the war. But maybe I had only just lit the fuse. The letter wouldn't leave my hands. I read it 100 times, every stroke of ink branded into my skull. You cannot bury what I left behind. What had he left? 3 nights later, I found out. It started with a phone call from one of the few managers who hadn't abandoned me. You need to come to the downtown location. Now. His voice shook like he'd seen a ghost. When I arrived, the restaurant was dark except for the flicker of a laptop screen in the office. My stomach sank as I stepped closer. On the screen was a video. My father's face filled the frame. Alive. Breathing. Speaking. No, recorded. Daughter, he began, his voice smooth as velvet, sharp as a blade. If you're watching this, then fate has played its cruel hand and I am gone. But you know me, I don't believe in endings. I believe in insurance. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with that same ruthless brilliance that had terrified me my whole life. I built more than an empire of restaurants. I built a network. Deals, secrets, debts. People who owe me their silence, and people who will burn this city before they let my name fade. And now, his lips curled into a smile. All of it belongs to you. My knees went weak. The screen went black. Then, files began flooding the desktop: contracts, offshore accounts, surveillance footage, names of people I'd only heard whispered in my father's circles. Judges. Politicians. Business rivals. Allies. Enemies. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a time bomb. Adrian's voice echoed in my head. He's not just fighting for his empire. He's fighting for your soul. Because now I had a choice. I could destroy it all and risk unleashing chaos that could swallow the city whole. Or I could use it. Wield it. Become everything he always swore I was destined to be. The legacy wasn't gone. It was here, alive, pulsing, waiting for me to claim it. And for the first time since I pulled the trigger in that warehouse, I asked myself the question I had been running from all along. What if his greatest revenge was turning me into him? I told myself it was temporary. Just one name. Just one favor. Adrian was still recovering, our restaurants were bleeding money, and the press circled like vultures waiting for my carcass to hit the ground. If I didn't act, everything I'd fought for, everything I'd nearly died for, would collapse. So I opened the files. The first was a judge. A man whose career hinged on a secret my father had buried years ago. I didn't threaten him. I didn't blackmail him. I just reminded him that the truth could resurface if he didn't dismiss the ridiculous charges being piled against me. He complied within hours. It was too easy. The second file was a competitor, a chain trying to buy out one of my struggling locations. My father had dirt on their CEO. Within a day of me making a call, their offer evaporated, and my restaurant was safe. Each move felt justified, necessary, even righteous. I wasn't doing it for greed or power. I was doing it to protect what was mine. But the more I used his weapons, the more I felt him lingering. In the mirror, in my thoughts, in the cold satisfaction that shivered down my spine every time someone bent to my will. Late one night, as I closed the files and shut the laptop, Adrian stirred in the hospital bed beside me. His voice was weak, but sharp enough to pierce the fog in my mind. "What are you doing, love?" I froze. "Saving us," I whispered. His hand found mine, trembling but firm. "Or becoming him." The words sliced through me, because I couldn't answer. Not truthfully. Not anymore. My father's empire wasn't gone. It was in my hands. And with every decision, I was beginning to wonder if that had been his plan all along. At first, Adrian said nothing. He watched me, quiet, observant, his eyes catching every subtle shift in my tone, every new steel edge in my voice. But the world wasn't quiet. Rumors spread like wildfire. Judges backing out of trials. Competitors pulling offers. Politicians suddenly softening their stance toward me. No one could prove it, but everyone whispered, "She's her father's daughter." The first time I walked back into one of my restaurants, the staff didn't greet me with warmth. They greeted me with fear. Heads bowed. Voices hushed. Even Marco, bandaged, recovering, looked at me as though I had grown into a stranger. And the worst part, a piece of me liked it. Power. Respect. Control. For so long, my father had made me feel powerless. Now the city was bending, because of me. But Adrian saw through the armor. One night, as I stood at the window of our apartment, scrolling through more files, he spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "You don't smile anymore." I didn't look up. "Smiles don't win wars." "You think this is war," he said, pushing himself up despite the pain lacing his body. "But it's not. It's a slow surrender. And every file you open, every call you make, you give him back a piece of you." I turned, snapping sharper than I meant to. "Do you want me to let it all burn? Let his loyalists destroy us? Let the empire crumble? We'd lose everything." Adrian's eyes locked on mine. "We'd still have us." His words landed like a blade between my ribs. Because for the first time, I realized I hadn't asked myself if saving the empire was worth the cost of us. And yet, the files still called to me. His voice still whispered through the ink and paper. The world was starting to see me as more dangerous than him. The terrifying part was, maybe they weren't wrong. The invitation arrived without warning. No signature. No logo. Just a black envelope slipped under my office door. Inside, a single card. Midnight. Dock 14. Come alone. Prove yourself. I knew immediately what it meant. His network, what was left of it, was calling me out. They had seen me move, seen me wield his secrets, and now they wanted to know if I had the spine to claim the throne. Adrian begged me not to go. "This isn't a meeting, it's a trap," he said, his hand tight on mine. "If you step into their world, you'll never step back out." But I had to. Because if I didn't, they'd see weakness. And weakness was blood in the water. The docks were empty except for shadows and the stench of salt and oil. A circle of black cars surrounded me, headlights flaring. Men stepped out, faces sharp, eyes hungry. At their center stood a woman I recognized instantly, Lucia, my father's most ruthless lieutenant. A woman who had once burned down a rival's business just to make a point. "You've been making moves," she said, her smile like a knife. "But whispers aren't enough. If you want to keep what's his, you need to bleed for it." She snapped her fingers. 2 men dragged someone forward, gagged, beaten, kneeling at my feet. A rival chef. One who had mocked me, tried to buy my staff, laughed when I struggled in my father's shadow. Lucia handed me a gun. "Prove you're not soft. Prove you're his daughter." The world tilted. My pulse thundered in my ears. Behind me, the water lapped against the dock, cold and merciless. In front of me, a man's life dangled on the edge of my decision. I could feel my father in that moment, his ghost whispering, "Do it. Take what's yours. Become what you were always meant to be." My hand shook as I raised the gun. Lucia's eyes glittered. The circle of men leaned closer. And Adrian's voice echoed in my memory, raw and desperate. "Every choice brings you closer to him. Or further away." The night held its breath. And in that split second, I knew whatever I chose here wouldn't just decide my fate. It would decide who I was. The gun felt heavier than it should have. Cold metal. Cold choice. Lucia watched me with that cruel, hungry smile, the men around her tense with anticipation. They weren't testing my aim, they were testing my soul. The man at my feet whimpered through the gag, his eyes wide with terror. For a heartbeat, I saw myself in him years ago, powerless beneath my father's shadow. I raised the gun. Gasps rippled through the circle. A few of the men grinned, satisfied. Lucia's eyes glimmered with approval. And in that moment, I realized something. If I refused, they'd destroy me. But if I pulled the trigger, they'd own me. Neither was an option. So I chose a third. The shot cracked like thunder. The man screamed, but not from a bullet in his chest. I had fired into the ground, inches from his knees, the sound echoing across the dock. Gasps turned to confusion. In the stunned silence, I pressed the barrel of the gun to Lucia's forehead. "You wanted proof." My voice was steady, sharper than the steel in my hand. "Here it is. I'm not him. I'll never be him. But don't mistake that for weakness. Cross me, and I won't aim at the ground next time." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then Lucia chuckled, low, dangerous, but edged with respect. She raised her hands slowly, stepping back. "Clever," she murmured. "You carry his fire, but your own rules. That makes you unpredictable. Dangerous." The circle of men shifted uneasily. Some nodded. Some whispered. And just like that, I wasn't being tested anymore. I was being measured. I released the man, shoving him toward the shadows. He stumbled away, alive, shaken, but free. As I lowered the gun, I knew I hadn't just defied them. I had declared myself. Not his heir. Not his shadow. Something far more dangerous. By dawn, word had spread. Some called me reckless. Others called me brilliant. But the truth was, my defiance at Dock 14 had done what I feared most. It split the network. Half of them swore loyalty not to my father's ghost, but to me. They respected that I refused to kill blindly, yet still commanded the room. The other half saw me as weak, a betrayal of everything he stood for. And in the underworld, betrayal has only one cure. The city became a chessboard. Cars following me at night. Strangers watching the restaurants. Whispers of contracts out on my name. I was no longer fighting my father. I was fighting the legacy of him alive in men and women who had fed on his power for decades. And through it all, Adrian stayed by me. His body healing, his spirit unbroken, his eyes watching me with the same question every day. How much of him are you willing to become? I didn't have an answer. Until the night the fire came. One of the restaurants, my first, the one I had fought hardest to save, was engulfed in flames. Staff barely escaped. The fire chief told me it was no accident. As I stood before the burning building, smoke curling into the sky, I felt the last thread of fear inside me snap. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about ending the war my father had started, once and for all. I called a meeting. Every remaining loyalist. Every wavering piece on the board. I stood at the head of the table my father once ruled, his chair empty beside me. "This ends now," I said, my voice steel. "You can follow me, or you can burn with what's left of his ghost. But make no mistake, I am not him. And I am not afraid." Silence. Then one by one, chairs scraped back. Heads bowed. And the tide turned. The network bent. Not to his shadow. To me. For the first time, I wasn't running from who I was. I was choosing it. Months later, the restaurants thrived. Adrian's hand was warm in mine as we walked through kitchens filled with laughter, not fear. My father's name faded from headlines, replaced by mine whispered in boardrooms, respected in shadows. But late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd sometimes hear him. His voice, low and mocking. "You see, I live in you still." And I would whisper back, staring into the dark, "No, you don't live in me. I buried you. But I'll carry the fire. On my terms." Because in the end, I hadn't become him. I had become something he never could imagine. His end. And my beginning.